9 plants resistance fighters grew to survive World War II, right under the enemy's nose. The most dangerous garden in Europe looked completely innocent. Neat rows, pretty flowers, a few leafy greens climbing the fence, nothing that would make a passing soldier reach for his rifle. But behind that quiet, sun-warmed plot of earth lived a weapon more powerful than anything stored in a munitions depot. Knowledge. Living, growing, edible, medicinal, and deeply strategic knowledge. This is not a story about farmers. This is a story about resistance fighters who understood something that has been almost entirely forgotten in the modern world, that a garden, properly planted, could feed a hidden cell of operatives for weeks, treat infected wounds without a pharmacy in sight, and even send coded messages across enemy lines without a single word being spoken. You are about to learn how they did it, plant by plant, root by root, and why every single one of these plants still matters today, whether you are preparing for hard times, living off-grid, or just starting to think seriously about what it means to be truly self-sufficient. Stay with this, because by the time you reach the end, you will never look at a flower bed the same way again. Why did resistance fighters turn to gardens in the first place? Well, when the occupation came, supply chains collapsed overnight. Pharmacies were raided or controlled, and markets were rationed. Hunger wasn't just a side effect of war, it was a weapon deliberately wielded against civilian populations. In occupied France, the Netherlands, Poland, Yugoslavia, and beyond, ordinary people were expected to comply, to starve quietly, to just disappear into submission. But you know, they did not. Instead, they turned to the land, but not in some romantic, pastoral sense, in a ruthless, strategic sense. Resistance networks, many of them run out of farmhouses, convents, and even suburban backyards, began cultivating specific plants that served multiple purposes at once. Imagine a plant that looked like a garden ornamental, but packed enough calories to sustain a man in hiding for days, or a plant that resembled a common weed but could close a wound and fight infection when sulfur drugs were nowhere to be found. There were even plants whose placement in the garden, left bed or right bed, tall row or short row, told a courier everything they needed to know, without a single document changing hands. These were not just lucky accidents. This was applied botanical intelligence, and the Germans, for all their military precision, really never figured it out. So, here are the 9 plants at the center of that secret. Jerusalem artichoke, the underground calorie bank nobody could see. Let's start with the one that hid best. The Jerusalem artichoke isn't from Jerusalem, and it's not an artichoke. It's actually a species of sunflower, tall, cheerful, and just wildly ordinary looking, that produces these knobbly tubers underground, and honestly, nobody walking past your fence would ever think to look for them. That invisibility was everything. A single plant can produce up to 5 pounds of tubers per season. Those tubers are dense with carbohydrates and inulin, which is a slow-burning, fiber-based energy source that keeps the body running without spiking blood sugar. Absolutely critical for people under chronic physical and psychological stress. Resistance fighters and those hiding Jews in attic spaces could dig up these tubers at night, boil or roast them, and eat without leaving almost any trace of what they had harvested. The plant grew back. The ground closed up. And yeah, nobody was the wiser. So, let's talk about healing and nutrition. Throughout history, people have relied on the plants growing right outside their doors to treat wounds, fight infection, and honestly, just keep themselves alive when food was scarce. These plants weren't just survival rations, they were medicine too. And, in times of crisis, knowing which leaves to pick or which roots to dig up could mean the difference between life and death. So, yeah, let's dig into a couple of these unsung heroes of the garden. Comfrey, the field medic growing next to the roses. Here is a plant that has saved more lives than most people realize, and it did it while pretending to be a garden ornamental. Comfrey is a broad-leafed, purple-flowered perennial that looks perfectly at home along a garden border. It flowers beautifully. It asks for almost nothing, and it contains some of the most potent wound-healing compounds found anywhere in the plant kingdom. The key compound is allantoin. It accelerates cell proliferation, meaning it genuinely, measurably speeds up the healing of skin, connective tissue, and bone. That is not folklore, that is biochemistry. Medieval herbalists called it knitbone, and that name was not poetic license. Comfrey poultices were used for fractures, sprains, deep bruising, and surface wounds for centuries. During the Second World War, when a resistance fighter took a beating, caught a bullet graze, or developed an infected wound in conditions where hospital access meant capture or death, Comfrey was one of the first things the network's medics reached for. Nasturtium, the edible flower that was also an antibiotic. Nasturtiums are almost aggressively cheerful looking. Bright orange, red, and yellow flowers, round lily pad leaves that catch water in little silver beads. They climb fences and cascade from window sills with the kind of casual beauty that nobody would ever think to question, which was exactly the point. Every single part of a nasturtium is edible: the flowers, the leaves, the stems, and especially the seeds. The seeds, when pickled in vinegar, were a widely used substitute for capers, adding valuable flavor and variety to a diet that was otherwise brutally monotonous. The leaves are peppery and nutrient-dense, packed with vitamin C, crucial for preventing scurvy in populations eating restricted wartime diets for extended periods. But here is what makes nasturtium genuinely remarkable in a survival context. It contains benzyl isothiocyanate, a compound with demonstrated antibiotic properties. Dandelion, the weed that fed and healed an army nobody could see. Most people spend money trying to kill dandelions, but resistance fighters, well, they spent energy making sure they had enough of them. That gap in understanding, it really tells you everything about the difference between peacetime comfort and wartime survival thinking. The dandelion is actually one of the most nutritionally complete wild plants in the temperate world. Its leaves are extraordinarily rich in vitamins A, C, and K. The roots contain inulin, that's the same slow-burning carbohydrate found in Jerusalem artichoke. And those roots were roasted as a coffee substitute when real coffee became a luxury item controlled by the occupiers. The flowers, they were made into wine, vinegar, and syrups. Every part of the plant was used, and the plant cost nothing, required nothing, and honestly, could not be eradicated from a determined patch of earth no matter what you did to it. When you think about stress, nutrition, and pain management during times of crisis, it's a whole different world from what most of us know. For resistance fighters, food wasn't just about calories. It was about survival, resilience, and keeping your body and mind functioning under constant threat. They relied on wild plants, creative substitutions, and traditional remedies to get by. Managing pain and stress wasn't just a matter of comfort. It was absolutely essential to keep going, to stay hidden, and to fight another day. Borage, the blue star flower with a hidden purpose. Borage looks like something a painter would invent. Brilliant blue star-shaped flowers, fuzzy grey-green leaves, a posture that's somehow both delicate and wildly vigorous. It actually appears in Renaissance paintings as a garden ornamental, but it also belongs to the culinary tradition of several Mediterranean countries. And, it was used deliberately and strategically in the wartime gardens of resistance networks across Europe. The leaves and flowers of borage are fully edible and carry a fresh, cucumber-like flavor. The flowers, frozen into ice or floated in water, were a luxury gesture that cost nothing. The leaves were added to salads and cooking pots to stretch meals. But the more significant role of borage in resistance networks was its medicinal one, specifically its use as an adrenal support herb. Lamb's quarters, the spinach that grew itself. Here is one that honestly most people walk right past. Lamb's quarters, also known as wild spinach or fat hen, is classified as a weed in most agricultural contexts. It grows in disturbed soil, along fence lines, in the cracks of paths, and in garden beds without any invitation. Most gardeners pull it out. That is an error born entirely of ignorance. Lamb's quarters is nutritionally superior to commercial spinach across almost every measurable category. The leaves are dense with vitamins A, C, and B complex. They contain calcium, iron, and potassium in concentrations that rival dedicated supplement crops. The young leaves are tender and mild, edible raw or lightly cooked. The seeds, collected in autumn, can be ground into flour. Feverfew, the migraine remedy that was also a morale plant. In sustained high-stress survival situations, chronic headaches are one of the most debilitating and demoralizing conditions that go almost entirely untreated. They erode concentration, they compromise decision-making, they destroy sleep quality. And in occupied Europe, with pharmaceutical supplies controlled or absent, there was almost nothing to be done about them, unless you had feverfew. Feverfew is a small, daisy-like perennial with delicate white flowers and aromatic, slightly bitter leaves. It is beautiful enough to pass easily as an ornamental, which is precisely how it appeared in the gardens of those who knew what they were doing. And what it does, specifically, is reduce the frequency and severity of migraines and tension headaches. Stinging nettle, the most nutritious plant they could have growing anywhere. Stinging nettle is uncomfortable to touch, which has led generations of people to regard it as a nuisance. Resistance fighters regarded it as a gift, because stinging nettle is, without serious competition, one of the most nutritionally dense plants available to the human diet, and it grows in almost every temperate environment on Earth without any cultivation at all. The leaves, once blanched or dried to neutralize the sting, are extraordinarily rich in protein, unusually high for a leafy green. They contain iron in concentrations that make them useful for treating anemia, which was endemic in malnourished wartime populations. They provide vitamins A, C, and K. They contain calcium, magnesium, and a suite of trace minerals rarely found together in any single plant. Throughout history, people have communicated in ways that go beyond words. The silent language, gestures, expressions, even the spaces between us, carries meaning that often speaks louder than speech itself. This unspoken communication, passed down from generation to generation, forms a legacy that shapes how we connect with one another today. It's kind of amazing to realize just how much of our understanding comes from what isn't said out loud. As we reflect on this legacy, let's remember that sometimes the most powerful messages are the ones we share in silence. The garden as a code. How plant placement became a silent language. This is the part that most people never hear about, and honestly, it's the part that will stay with you the longest. In certain resistance networks, especially in rural France and the Low Countries, the physical arrangement of the garden itself became a communication system. Not the plants themselves, but their positions, their combinations, the presence or absence of a flowering plant in a particular bed, whether the tall plants faced east or west. Even something as simple as a pot moved to the left side of a doorway or the right. The logic behind it all was elegant and honestly nearly unbreakable. The Gestapo was searching for documents, radios, weapons, and people, but they weren't looking for gardening arrangements. Simple systems worked best. A pot of red flowers on the left windowsill meant the route was clear. A pot of white flowers on the right meant it was compromised. A row of tall plants left uncut after a certain date meant a pickup was delayed. A conspicuously empty bed, where plants had obviously been recently removed, could signal that a location had been abandoned. Some networks used the presence of specific medicinal herbs in particular positions as a binary code. This herb present, that herb absent, giving directional information for couriers who knew the system. Others used the state of care of particular plants as a signal. A well-watered, tended plot meant safety, but a deliberately neglected or dried-out patch, left that way on purpose, meant stay away. What these 9 plants tell you about survival that nobody else is saying? If you pull back and really look at what all 9 of these plants have in common, you'll see that the pattern is the message. Every single one of them offered multiple functions at the same time. Not a single one was just for one thing. Jerusalem artichoke fed people and hid its harvest underground. Comfrey healed wounds and looked like just another ornamental. Nasturtium fed, provided vitamin C, acted as a mild antibiotic, and grew so casually it never attracted attention. Dandelion was food, medicine, coffee substitute, and cover, all in one species. Borage helped with stress and brought edible beauty. Lamb's quarters fed people without even being cultivated. Feverfew managed chronic pain. Nettle nourished, treated anemia, and could even clothe a person. And the garden as a whole, it communicated in silence. The last thing to remember, the most dangerous garden in Europe looked just like a flower bed. The most capable survival garden in your neighborhood can look exactly the same way. And that's not deception for its own sake. That's wisdom, refined under extreme pressure by people who simply could not afford to get it wrong. They got it right. They survived. They fed hidden families, wounded fighters, and grieving partisans through some of the darkest years in modern history, using nothing but soil, seeds, and the kind of knowledge civilization used to pass down as basic literacy. You have access to all of it now. The only question is whether you'll choose to use it. Start digging.